Right, I think I might have found where some of the power has been sapped from this Continental GT. It's probably not responsible for all of it. I just pulled the alternator stator off and it's been binding on the rotor. There's been a lot of friction there and quite a bit of heat by the looks of it as well. So that certainly wouldn't help the engine spin freely. It's not going to sap too many horsepower, I don't suppose, but every little helps when you've only got about 20 on a good day. So, and look how hot that rotor's been, look how black it is. It's got all stuff probably deposited and melted on it from the stator encapsulation. So I'm going to clean all that lot up and see if I can get it a little bit more central perhaps than it was. But there doesn't seem to be a hell of a lot of clearance between that rotor and the stator. Interestingly, some cheapskate has fitted an Indian Royal Enfield Bullet rotor to it, and they're not brilliant because they can fly apart and explode. So I think we'll possibly be looking at replacing that and getting a decent one instead of it, because they are quite handy at destroying engines and engine components, those things. But first of all, I'll try and get it cleaned up and see if I can get it spinning a bit more freely. That'll be a start. Right, I'm just going to rotate the engine backwards. I'll turn it forwards first, to or around top dead centre, and then turn it back. And there's quite a loud sort of clicking noise. Here we go, I'm going to start turning it backwards now by the rotor. It's at the point where the inlet valve would actually be shutting. It only does it backwards, mine. It doesn't seem to do it forwards. Another little thing to investigate. The engine's easier to turn now that that alternator stator is out of the way, but there's still a slight sort of stiffness about it. It's not as bad as it was, but I'm going to investigate further and see if I can find anything. I'm just running this Continental GT 250 again with the alternator stator removed. There was quite a bit of binding between the rotor and the stator. I've cleaned the rotor up with emery tape, and I've also cleaned the alternator stator up because it has sort of got a burnt and baked on residue sort of built up between the both of them. And I thought that the best way to see what it was like and if there was any difference without the alternator rotor rubbing the stator would be to remove it, so that's what I've done. The engine still sounds a bit tight, but I've got to say that the throttle response on and off is a lot more rapid. The ignition timing is a little more advanced actually than it was. I was just playing about with that really. I'll put that back to the marks to be bare so that it's as it would have been before. And bear with me a sec. Should be able to do this. That's retarded it a bit from where I had it as an experimental setting. It's actually coming back to the line. Right. So that timing is as it was before when I strobed it. I've got to say, that does sound a lot more lively and responsive than it did before. I think as it's raining though, and just to sort of eliminate any other suspects, I think I might strip the top end and just have a look and see what's going on between the cylinder barrel and the piston. because there's not much, but there's a bit of smoke there. But removing the alternator stator has obviously been a big help to how freely the engine will pick up revs. So that's something that I'm going to have to put right somehow. The fit between the stator and the rotor and stop them binding, because there's no real way to sort of, on the Bullets and various other models, you can shift the stator this way and that way and whatever, and use feeler gauges between and whatever. I don't actually think there's enough space diametrically between that stator and the rotor to allow any movement, and the way it fits, it's into that recess, so there's no real scope for moving the stator around like that, if you like, around the rotor. It's in a fixed position, so I may even have to somehow hone that out, or possibly put the rotor in the lathe and skim it down a little or whatever, but one way or another I'll have to deal with that, because it's definitely causing a lot of friction and robbing the engine of a fair bit of power, I would guess. So there we are. I think I'll look in there next at the barrel and piston and see what's going on in there. Okay, well here we are with the top end stripped on this 250 Continental GT that seemed a little reluctant, and I've established that the bottom end feels quite good. It is indeed quite a tight big end, that, and it's moving freely. It's slewing on the crank pin fine, but there's absolutely or virtually no side to side play at all in that conrod, so it is what you'd call a tight big end rather than it being tight to turn. And I've still got the alternator stator off, and I can turn the engine quite comfortably like that, so I'm not worried about anything being too tight there. It's going to loosen up for certain with some miles on it, but I wouldn't say that that is enough to rob it of any great deal of power, so not as much as the alternator rotor binding in the stator would have done. So I've also decoked and had a good look at the piston and cleaned it up, and the two compression rings were actually a little bit stuck in their grooves. There's been a sort of, I don't know whether the camera will pick this up, but there's actually been a very partial seizure at some time, and the two compression rings were quite stuck, so I freed them up and cleaned out the grooves a little bit, and like I say, decoked the piston and checked it, and it all looks okay. But on top of that, the second compression ring, the top ring, doesn't matter which way up that goes in the instance of this one, but the second ring had very faint markings on it with the word top, and the word top was facing down, so I've turned it over so it now faces up. And I'm also pretty confident that the two-piece oil ring here, I think the two segments were the wrong way up as well, so I've got, I don't know whether, again, if the camera will pick this up, let's get out in the daylight a little bit, but I've actually got the continuous rail is on, let me see, the top, and the sort of bumpy segment, if you like, the one with all the lumps and bumps in it, is on the bottom. Well, they were the other way up. Now I'm pretty sure in my own mind that that is the way they're meant to be, and there was a little bit of smoke before. The piston ring gaps are fine, the piston fits the bore with a 4th thou clearance, which is good. I've deglazed the bore itself and had a look, and there's not a great deal to worry about in there. There's some odd, very light markings here and there. There's no gouges or scores or anything, so I cleaned it and deglazed it, and I'm going to put it all back together, and then I guess I'll probably have a look at the cylinder head, which you can just probably see through there. I'll get the valves out, I'll decoke it and check that over as well. So maybe the piston rings being trapped and the alternator rotor binding, we're robbing this thing of quite a bit of power, I don't know, but like I say, I got it all cleaned up. I'm going to put the piston and barrel back on next, and then after that I'll be looking at the cylinder head and we'll take it from there.